is Wes Streeting MP, the Shadow Health Secretary. Wes, good to have you on the programme. Always good to talk to you. Obviously, I need your comment on what the Prime Minister said, which does feel clumsy and ill-judged, and funnily enough follows directly on what he said yesterday about the king's cancer having been caught early, which subsequently had to be rowed back on because actually nobody had told him that, he hadn't been informed of that, and he had to kind of say, well, he hadn't really known that, and what's going on? He seems to be talking out of turn.
Oh, I wish I'd known that last point about the king, because off the back of what the PM said, I'd been making the same point, talking about my own experience of cancer being diagnosed early, but that's beside the point. I think what we saw at Prime Minister's questions today is what happens when bad political punchlines that are developed off the backs of the misery and discrimination experienced by a small minority of our country comes into contact with the consequence of that kind of toxic politics. Because Brianna Ghey was murdered in part, as we now know from the court proceedings, because she was trans. And it's so easy against this backdrop of ugly culture wars for the Prime Minister and the people who encourage him and cheer him on and laugh alongside him, as we saw today, to think that their words don't have consequences and these two things are separate. But as political leaders, it's our responsibility to try and navigate our way through, particularly on this question of trans equality, what can sometimes be a set of complicated, challenging questions. And we should be doing that in a thoughtful and respectful way. And that's why I think the Prime Minister fell so very badly short today. And what was even more disappointing was that he was given several opportunities to stand up and apologise, but he's so small and petty, he didn't take that chance. And it was only at the end, when obviously lots of people had passed him notes saying, look, this is a really bad look, Prime Minister, that he stood up and paid tribute to Brianna's mother, Esther, who had to observe these proceedings from the House of Commons gallery. I just think, surely the murder of a trans girl like Brianna should remind all of us of the responsibility we bear to conduct our debates, our conversations in Parliament and in politics with more respect. And the final thing I'd just say on this, the reason the Prime Minister's doing this is he hopes that if there's a culture war, if we're having this sort of conversations we're having now, that people might forget the cost of living crisis and their rising bills and their rising mortgages and their rising rents. They might forget the worst crisis in the history of the National Health Service, and they might forget that 14 years of Conservative government have driven this country into the ground. And I don't think it's going to succeed. I don't think that's the kind of country we are. He can do petty, small politics as much as he likes. We're going for big vision and the answers to our country's problems, and that's why a general election and change that Britain needs can't come soon enough.
Gosh, do we hear a new slogan here in the phrase big vision? We've heard of big pharma, we've heard of big business. Is this one the latest one? Where's big vision? Or is this one we need to wear on a T-shirt and have embroidered on a tea towel?
I can make you one and send it in if you like.
Yes,
There's
please.
a serious point here, which is I think people feel so miserable about politics, and they've sort of lost this idea that politics can make any difference, can be any good. And what we're trying to set out with our 5 missions for a whole decade of national renewal is this idea that politics can get Britain working again, whether it's on the economy, on the National Health Service, on education and life chances for working class kids from backgrounds like mine, keeping our streets safe, giving Britain its energy security back. And what our manifesto will be about this year are the practical first steps to take us towards that decade of national renewal if we're given the chance to govern. And that's the conversation Labour wants to be having. If the Prime Minister wants to be small and petty, well, that, I think people would judge him for it.
All right, Wes, I'm going to say something now, and I don't think there's anybody in the land who would disagree with me. When you have a throbbing toothache, when you have an abscess or some kind of terrible thing, just absolutely gyrating in your gum, the pain is so horrific. You certainly don't care about culture wars. You care more than anything
Absolutely.
on earth about whether you have a dentist. That's what you need. You need a dentist, and if you've got a limited income, as most people have, you want an NHS dentist to sort out your toothache, and there's nothing else on earth, really, that you give a damn about. So what is the story with the Labour Party and dentistry? Because really, there's an abomination. We hear of dental deserts, we hear of people pulling out their own teeth with pliers, we hear of children being admitted to hospital at under the age of 5, and the most frequent reason for their hospital admission is decaying teeth that they have to have yanked out. I mean, it's really an appalling and dreadful kind of stigma on our society that we can't find any dentists. So what do you reckon? What's Labour saying, and what are you saying about what the Tories are promising today?
Yeah, it is Dickensian, and we've been campaigning on this for some time now. Quite a bit of what the government announced today is virtually identical to what Labour put forward in our emergency dentistry rescue plan. I welcome that, because I'd be a bit churlish to say, oh, it's just like what we've put forward, and then say, oh, but it's terrible. There is a really important distinction, though, between what Labour was saying and what the government's saying today. We recognise that a lot of those measures, the extra appointments or the toothbrushing for kids, and the recruitment into underserved areas, those are important emergency measures to deal with the immediate crisis in front of us. But unless we deal with the reform of NHS dentistry itself and the chasm that exists between how much dentists earn in the private sector versus how much they get in the NHS, we're not going to rebuild dentistry, and that's what dentists are saying today. And what really makes my blood boil about this is that this was in the Conservative manifesto in 2010. We are now 14 years on, and the Health Secretary today said they're going to do that dentistry contract reform in 2025. Now, that's a bit presumptuous, because it's after the next general election, and I hope that the Conservatives will be out by then, but that's up to the voters. But what I would say to people watching is they promised this in 2010 and didn't deliver, and in 2015, and in 2017, and 2019. Who are they trying to kid when they say, oh, in 2024 it will be on our manifesto, but trust us, this 5th time will really deliver? I think their time is up, and the longer the Conservatives are in power, the longer patients will wait. And I hope people will choose change and turn to the party that created the NHS 75 years ago to rescue it from the depths of the worst crisis in its history. Because Labour has a plan, but we've also got the track record to deliver.
Wes Streeting, we heard it here first. Big vision. Thank you very much indeed. Always good to see you.